Here.
Jackie McCurdy,
Here.
Chris Corey,
Here.
Jesse Purdon,
Here.
Alan Horowitz, Russ Wynn.
Here.
Okay. And can I have approval of the minutes for August 1st? Or are there any changes to the minutes?
Make a motion to approve.
Second.
All those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed? Thank you. And we'll have the attorneys.
I have no updates for you really, other than I have made all the changes requested to date, and they're all contained in the package.
Very good, very good.
Burned the midnight oil, didn't you?
Is there anyone that would like to ask the city attorney about something that they're interested in and they haven't
Be
seen?
off subject.
No, good. Okay,
Okay.
well then we'll review the items that are with the joint meeting with the council.
And I believe there's a draft agenda attached in the package after the big, long charter revision.
After what? I'm sorry.
At the end of your packet,
The last page of your packet is a draft of the joint meeting agenda. So we wanted to confirm that with you all today, and then we could go back to the page before
the
that.
page before has the items
is the-
you've
is
actually.
the items that you had mentioned you want to
Okay.
discuss.
I just, one question, Madam Chair.
Yes,
We discussed the RFP thing at the end of the last meeting, remember, for the city-owned properties?
Yes.
Is there any, you said you were gonna think about it based on some of the upcoming stuff. Did you go anywhere further on that?
Well, if you want us to consider that, myself and Mr. Purdon discussed the possibility of putting out for RFP or for sale, all city-owned properties. I think we would need to discuss it more like as a policy matter, like where the cutoffs are, those kind of things. All I can say to date is there are jurisdictions that, it's not a charter provision, but they have a process for selling off property, and they do it on a regular basis. Generally, it's the counties. I'm sure there are cities that are large enough to do that, and the process generally starts with they are getting what are known as eskeded lots that come to them because someone didn't pay their taxes or because the neighboring jurisdiction didn't want them, and there are lots that they owned but are unused, and so therefore properties that are acquired that are sitting unused and are not available for the use by other departments then have a process for going out for RFP, like a notice of land sales, to see if first adjoining property owners might want them or if the public in general wants to bid on those properties. So it's a policy discussion if you have any interest in pursuing
Well,
it.
the reason that I brought it up is because, I mean, initially in the onset of this council, one of the things that the mayor was discussing was fiscal responsibility and the amount of lands, and we all know which ones we're talking about. We're talking about bamboo, we're talking about lime tree. So pretty much
Wait a
everywhere.
minute. Could you just slow down a little and?
Okay, yes,
So that
absolutely.
I didn't get
Okay,
the last part.
all right, so,
We all know what they are.
okay, so we all know which properties I'm discussing?
No.
Okay, so the properties I'm talking about are bamboo, lime tree, in front of Mako,
Go
in
ahead.
so all, essentially, what I would like to see is on a regular basis, and I have no thought process exactly on the exact time parameters, but a process whereby we, on a periodic basis, would be putting all city land that is doing nothing for the tax base out for RFP, not up for sale, but RFP, so that we can have at least some oversight over what potentially might be there. But we have some of these properties we've had for 20 years now. We have no idea what the market value would possibly be. All we can go on what it was sold for 2005 or whatever. So there are a number of properties that we could look at as potential next steps for what downtown might look like. But we can't do that as long as we're just sitting on them.
But that's not
Yeah,
in the
I just want to
charter.
clarify the properties, the only properties that the council has discussed as made a motion towards
Right.
is the bamboo property, which is at the intersection of the river, and was the Levin lot, which is, it was purchased, that is on the
Sure is.
north side. No, Levin lot is the property that's just north of where the old community hall building was. It's a
Okay.
lot that, it faces Old 41, but it's opposite of the park. the original purpose of the purchase of the Lemon Tree lot, which is the property that's just north of Shared Unity, was an expansion of the park.
Right.
It's currently used by the Lions Club for the farmers market. So in the discussions, it was an RFP to discuss first as phase one was Bamboo, and secondly was Levin Lot, those were originally purposed. At the same time, Levin Lot was purchased approximately 6 months or so after where the library is now placed, which was the church property was purchased. Those were purchased around the same time frame for economic development revitalization. Previous city manager Gary Price purchased the Lemon Tree lot. The idea also was eventually there would be looking at, there's a house that's adjacent to there. There's been previous discussions and there down the road, and that was for the park expansion of Riverside Park.
Right.
So those were the lots that were discussed. We currently are working with getting a proposal from a marketing agency that has a state contract that does provide market analysis on and assists with RFPs. And that was the direction we had the last council meeting, to bring a scope of service for that, and they could actually bring it to market.
What is the cost of doing that, out of curiosity?
We haven't gotten the cost yet. They're giving us a scope of work for that, but that was what was voted on by the council.
Is it part of the charter that they do?
Yeah, because I think we're getting lost a little bit here. At least
Yeah.
the understanding that I had in speaking with Jesse was that, what, as a general policy, we would obviously wouldn't be considering putting in the charter the sale of one property. The council could easily do that.
No.
So this would just be, shall there be an accounting done at so many intervals to see if there's property that's unwanted by the city and put it up for sale?
Well, and not just intervals, I'm saying whatever is a reasonable amount of time, and I can't, like I said, I have no vested interest in the timetables, but whether it's every 2 years, every 5 years, every year is probably not practical, but I think every 2, every 3, or more, at least doing an inventory to see what we could possibly get, because we have no idea what we can get for some of these properties, and additionally, they could be catalysts to public money coming behind the 22 million we put in government money down there. So we could finally start to actually get the economic development that we've been talking about, but we can't do that if we don't know what we potentially could get, which is why RFP is important. I don't want it to be something that wouldn't fit the plan, but to not do anything and sit on the tax rolls forever, indefinitely, after we've already spent so much down there, it doesn't seem like the wisest thing to me. And I just think that there should be some procedure that we could regularly do some type of maintenance in that regard, whatever that might look like.
I think also what the city attorney is referring to in those larger communities is,
What?
we haven't typically in the past had many foreclosures on properties that are not meeting code regulations. And so many of these larger cities and communities, they have a large number of units who have repetitive code violations, and at some point they look at the recapture of those properties, and then you could look at programs where you offer them to, for example, Habitat for Humanity or other such programs where you could work towards affordable housing, and you put those back out into the market. Those are some of the examples of how they've been used in larger communities. That's something we're looking at internally as well as if we have other, smaller
Is
houses.
this something that we should talk at the joint meeting with the council in regard to?
I guess what I would, you're gonna have a number of things to talk about.
Yep.
I think if you're gonna bring this one up, I think you have to try and zero down the focus of what the issue would be. I mean, because
I honest to God cannot hear you.
I
I
think
hear
you need
you
to,
that
I
to
think you need to,
start-
I think you need to figure out what the focus of, because it sounds like, I'm not sure that there's unanimity or even a consensus of understanding what the issue is, and I would think that you'd want to flush that out here before raising it with the council.
Yes, but I just wanted to find out what the operation would be.
Well, and the way I would envision something like this is you have to keep it as generic as possible, because obviously if those properties like Bamboo and other, they were acquired for a purpose at the time. And so trying to say that only properties acquired for X purpose, that's impossible to deal with in the charter. So it has to be a rule of general applicability. And then obviously, I would think that you'd want to lay at least some basis for how the decision to put those out would be, because if it's, for instance, if a cost basis, well, yeah, they're not generating a lot of income, but undeveloped property doesn't generate income even when it's on the tax rolls, and if you have to do appraisals every year or 3 years, you're probably spending more money. So if you guys can, if this is something that's interesting to you and you can come up with some criteria, maybe I could draft language, but I think
What do
it's,
you need specifically? Because I mean, at the end of the day, it's simple. City, on a regular basis, I would like the city to do RFPs on city-owned land that isn't doing anything. Just so and an RFP doesn't mean that it's gonna get sold, it just means that people have the potential to bring private dollars downtown. That's,
but
I mean,
that,
that's all
that
I'm
could
trying to.
happen without any need for a charter amendment.
Right, but, okay,
That's what I was
okay.
trying to get.
So,
There's nothing that prevents that.
John?
Has the city and does staff have a process outside of the charter or anything else for sale of surplus property, first of all?
What we have in this instance is that the city council has directed staff to work with a marketing agency to find what's in the market and then provide an RFP. We have other city-owned properties that we've been acquiring for other purposes, such as transportation, connectivity. So the downtown properties that they have voted on as a policy to look at providing an RFP on is the Bamboo and the Levin lot.
So they have a process.
If they are, as of right now, they are asking us to get an analysis of the market and determine the highest and best use and market, and then they would work with the RFP with us.
I think those are special purpose properties. Those are different, and I think to do what you're talking about, and, frankly, just personally, I would like to see the city get moving with some sort of activity in the, sale of those properties. But I think we're going to complicate that process by trying to amend the charter to require in a generic way the city to do something with surplus property they acquire, unless, like Derek's saying, we're in a position where maybe that's restricted to property that's acquired through a foreclosure or some sort of code enforcement action. That would be a narrower, because in my view, you don't go, I wouldn't be in favor of going out with an RFP. If you got surplus property, you're just going to put it out there for sale in a manner that would try and get the highest market price for the property. Now, you could do other things, like Derek is suggesting, where you offer it first to some nonprofits or for other purposes. I understand that. But generally, that's not going to be an RFP process. It's just going to be a process where you identify surplus property, and by surplus, I mean property that you've determined is not necessary for future city needs, and then you go through a process to dispose of that, which I don't think is necessarily a bad idea. I don't know, I need to think a little bit about whether that's really something that ought to go in the charter, or whether that's something that staff would do on their own, which, would be something available, something available to you just as good business practice. And then the issue with the downtown parcels and proceeding with an RFP, I think you're in a different situation with those. I don't know how we effectively address what you're talking about through a charter amendment, or whether that's a good avenue to take.
well, and I understand what you're saying. I'm not necessarily saying it is either, but I think us leading up to the joint meeting with council, we can get the discussion at least started. And if this isn't the appropriate venue, at least the conversation happens. Because, I mean, these properties, as you know, have been sitting for a long time. And there's so much potential for them. And we've spent so much money. And we're already starting to hear naysayers say that we're not getting any economic development activity down there, but we're holding on to the best pieces. Of course we're not, because they're licking their chops waiting for an opportunity. So I don't know what the process would be, but I just feel that we have to start being able to look at that and the reason I say RFP is simply because with the city RFPs, they are so detailed that we would get a hyper level of understanding of exactly what we would choose between, and then we could uniquely identify if it's going to fit directly into what we have down there and what we envision down there, a bikeable, walkable, pedestrian-friendly downtown. So will it fit into that model or not? If we're just put it up for sale, it's going to be a different process than if they have to go through the Bonita Springs RFP, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and just for the record, I'm not suggesting we put that up for sale. That's already in the course of a process that directed by the council. So I think that, frankly, that train has left the station. I don't know that there's anything for us to do on that issue. In terms of the charter, it's more a question of, should there be some generic provision that requires a review, periodic review and disposal of surplus property?
If we make one that is similar to that, and the council says, hey, you guys don't need to, then fine, but the conversation is still had at least. If we stop the conversation right now, and we don't do something to the council, this conversation doesn't continue. It dies now, unless one of us decides to reach out to a councilman or the mayor. I mean, it dies, so there's nothing wrong with, if the appropriate venue is not this, then I believe, I know our council people, they'll say, hey, that's not your role, let us look at it.
Well, let me ask a question. I'm trying to, is the issue trying to put assets back into circulation, or is it specific properties? Because, you know, the concern might
Assets
be.
back into circulation to create economic development in the area that we've spent so much private money, that I want to start being able to tell people that, hey, there's going to be good money after all the money we put down there, and it's actually working, look. But, I mean, we are not in that position yet.
But those properties are already going through the RFP process.
Yeah.
It will already be done before a charter amendment goes into effect.
We'll have RFPs on all those properties before the charter.
They've already been directed to do so.
Right.
This would possibly
They're doing
delay the
it now.
process.
Right, so what I'm saying is if we have the procedure,
It's already been initiated. That's what I really.
So I guess what I'm trying to understand is if you're discussing the assets when you're talking about 041.
Right.
The properties we have on 041, we're in a process now for that. The other city-owned properties we have, we evaluate even smaller foreclosures on properties or houses. We've looked at, can we add to park space? You know, can we provide connectivity? Can we use it for extra stormwater? So that's a staff analysis that happens with every property that we have. We've also acquired properties adjacent to US 41 for potential connection of connector roads. So if it's focusing on Old 41, we're in that process.
well, no, it's not specifically to Old 41, it's specific to the
Let's
city.
not beat a dead horse.
Well, it's not a dead horse. They're about to raise taxes, and they're saying that the reason they want to do it is because of water. I'm saying we have a bunch of excess properties in the city, and we have no idea how many there are, or if we have even attempted or
Well, they're
sold any of
looking at
them.
the
They're talking about
properties now.
downtown. I'm talking about the city as a whole.
What taxes are you talking about them raising, Jesse?
Stormwater.
Stormwater
Yes.
utility?
Yes.
It's not a tax.
What is it?
It's a fee. It's not based on an ad valorem tax.
It's not an ad valorem tax. You'd have to increase the millage, which we're not doing because we're already getting $470,000 above what we were supposed to get this year. That's a whole different scenario, and we'll get there, believe me. But that's not what I'm talking about. We can move on. We can just move on. I will reach out to some. I will try to figure out a way to make something of this. If we're at a standstill.
I think we're at a standstill.
Right. Let's move on.
Let's move on. Yes.
Did we, I wasn't here after it was brought up, the changing of the name of the city.
Well, that's been
We
decided.
scratched that?
That's what happens when you leave a meeting early.
By the way, I apologize the last meeting. It was, I got a text, there was a medical emergency. A friend's son was in a hospital, and it was a medical emergency, so I had to leave, and I apologize for that. So,
It didn't come up after, without the
okay,
instigator.
okay. Anyone want to bring it up with the city? With the city council? What's that? Yeah, I brought it up. No, I mean, like,
You want to put it on the, or you want to
I
put it
would-
on the list for the agenda?
yeah, it's not something that I think that I'm not pushing for it, but I think that at least we bring it up to city council, and maybe city council will then decide either A, that they think it's a good idea to be on the actual ballot, or that they just simply think that this is an interesting topic to, down the road, do some analysis on, and maybe hire an economic development company to come out and do some further analysis to look at the pros and cons of that for the city.
So put it on our list
Yeah.
to discuss it with the council.
Yes, I would motion to put that on the list of things to discuss with council.
Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
All those in favor?
How?
Aye.
Point of order, I would just like to note that I just want to make sure I got this correct. We're going to discuss with the council changing the name of the city, but not potentially selling any of the property we have.
Listen, it is.
I just wanted to make
the
sure.
same thing.
It is-
Yes, you're right. That's what we're doing.
Okay, I just
That's
wanted.
what we're doing.
I wanted that to be reflected on the record. I did second it, I just think it's,
On the record.
what was
Did
the-
all those in favor say aye?
Aye.
To putting it on the agenda? All those opposed? So it did not.
It passed.
4-1.
Yeah, you didn't vote against
I
it.
voted yes in favor.
Okay, then it passed. It will be on the agenda.
That's all you, Omer. I have nothing to say.
I'll hold the flag for that.
That's all right.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
can we talk about the discussion items for the meeting? Is that where we are?
yes.
The question on this, as I was going through this, I did look back at some of our prior meeting notes and saw these had come up, one form or another, to put on the list. And then a number of these we've taken action on as a committee, and they're now incorporated in as a markup of the, so originally, when I thought we had a list, I thought this was going to be sort of independent of the changes, the proposed changes of the charter that we were giving to them. But this is kind of a mixture of those. It's some things that just came up, like the name change, it's some other things. So my question is just, how is this, and I don't mind having these as talking points as some, we have a number of changes in there, and we're not going to talk about all of them at equal length. It's kind of a question of how do we propose to present the body of changes that we have, and then deal with these items that are called discussion items, some of which are, in here already, and some of which would not be included in the markup.
Well, yeah, there seems to be,
I think you
No,
are
you are
correct.
right.
The intent is if you look at the draft agenda, what we planned on doing is the city attorney was going to give a brief overview of the recommended changes thus far from the board. And the items to be discussed should just be those that you haven't moved forward on because you wanted more direction from the
yeah,
council.
well, I think there's probably
Yeah.
three, so, and this, we could probably combine those to make it easier. We were planning, and I would go through the charter with the changes. And then go through them, whether we want to comment, have you guys comment on why you made those changes at that time, or only in response to questions from the council. We may need to work on the flow, how we want to present that, work that out today. And then of these remaining items, there are some that they're like the COLA, like the changing the time for meetings, where it was, I almost viewed as more of an explanation of why the Charter Review Committee wanted to discuss these items and see if it's just, not just a recommendation, but let you explain why specifically you want to make these changes. And then there are other changes like the debt limit, where you didn't come up with a recommendation, but it's something that should be looked at, and you're looking for them to give some indication as to, for you to come back and make changes on direction. So I'm not really sure if you would like us to, when we go through the joint meeting, if you just want me to run through all the changes and then wait for comments, do we want to maybe pause at each change and have a dialogue with the council?
Pause,
Okay.
because you get lost if you hear everything, all the changes. I don't think,
Yeah, and I don't want to presume also to make this, to reflect the decision-making of the committee by saying this change was made for this reason, so I would describe the change, and then, I don't think we want to have each decision-maker, whoever came up with the idea, propose it. Maybe it just as a committee as a whole, some of them will be self-explanatory, like the removals. But
I think what will be expected is you'll be describing the change, and at that point, if any of the committee members feel they'd like to comment more on it, you can do so, and there might be questions from the city
or
council.
ask for questions
Yeah,
from the
ask for questions
council.
from the council on that change.
So then these items here, the discussion items, they would just be those last items that are just kind of,
Where no formal decision has been made by the charter and review committee, and you were looking for some direction from the council.
Okay, and that was my understanding coming in. Well, my thought is, most of these, with the exception of a few, were unanimous by the committee. I mean, I'd be comfortable with the chair sort of summing up the thinking by the committee on those, just so we're not taking all day to go through each one of us talking about our thoughts on them. If anybody, I'm not suggesting that if somebody has strong feelings about something or wants to
other way
offer,
or
they, but the ones that there was some difference of opinion on, and there were only 2 or 3 of those, we might have more discussion on that, but just to sort of move us through the items that were unanimous, I'd be comfortable with the chair kind of addressing those.
So in my kind of review, I would say that the ones that are really up there for further discussion, because we can explain the compensation changes. I mean, that would be 15, Section 24, and Section 46. Because we don't have proposed language for that. We don't even really have proposed policy changes for that. They're really discussion items purely. For instance, the changing the meeting to nights, the possibility of reducing the time frame. We have language for that, but not the night meeting. Those discussions, I think you want to have a dialogue, because you don't want that to come straight to a city council vote at the end of this process and they just, decide that they don't understand the logic and take it out. Were there any others in the name change?
Did you want to separate the hours, because we did have language for that, and leave that when you discuss the?
Could you speak up?
Oh, I was asking, did he want to separate the language? We already do have language regarding the calling of emergency meetings.
Do we just want to do it, is the only outstanding issue then, because I think there was unanimity about the changing the meeting times, except once we added the emergency exclusion, do we just want to talk about night meetings then?
Does that mean the 48 hours is an automatic? I mean,
No, the 48 hours has already been voted on by the committee, and that's in there with an exclusion for emergencies. So night meetings would be the only remaining item in here.
One that's in that.
Okay.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
So after the last meeting, after Barbara's point on the ex parte, I just want to bring this back up. I went back and I reviewed the video of my zoning hearing and my actual city council hearing. And at my zoning hearing, I had 3 different members attempt to negotiate with me while I was sitting there on items with my application that city staff had never brought up, significant items involving height, density, setbacks, things that, should I want to actually answer them, I would have needed to go out, have architects, analysis, reconstruction done. I would have to have all new market analysis done. At the city council hearing level, I had one council member decide to change his vote and specifically stated that he wouldn't vote because one of my buildings was a double corridor versus a single corridor building on the back end. No city staff had ever brought that up. And given that, I think that this idea, again, of ex parte communication, not allowing ex parte communication, having a candidate spend, an applicant spent over $500,000 in a year and a half of work, and then sit down and be asked questions to negotiate on the spot, things that would cost easily hundreds of thousands of dollars and months of work to be able to figure out, is just inappropriate for decent-sized projects. So I don't know if we can re-vote on something, but I would still like to bring that back up right now on whether we even have this as an option to not have ex parte communication. So I'd like to motion again to remove this and to not bring up with council the idea of not having ex parte communication.
second.
You mean of taking out the prohibition on it?
Correct.
Taking out what?
The ex parte, so not,
The language that we've adopted in 56 in the recommendations.
taking out the language that requires that city council not have ex parte communication.
Point of order,
Yeah,
Mr. Chairman. We don't have a full complement of the charter membership tonight. 2 of the people that are not here voted for that language. I think it'd be inappropriate to try to amend the language of this particular section at this point, since it's already, in their minds,
It's already a done deal.
settled matter.
Our, excuse me.
Just-
No, go
Just
right
a
ahead.
further point of order. I mean, as I understand it, there, generally, if you're following Robert's Rules of Order, you can't, someone on the losing end can't bring up a matter for a revote. Someone on the, who was on the winning side, who prevailed, would have to do that. And I'm saying that,
Yeah.
having voted
Been on that
against
Yeah,
this.
totally legitimate.
So I think that would be the way to do it, to rehear it at the committee level. Other than that, I would say that's further to my comment that we should be, that for these items that weren't unanimous, that some different opinions can be expressed when we meet with the council
Yeah.
to
Yes.
explain our, the position of of some of the committee members on that, and that's probably where this needs to go next.
I agree.
Yeah, no problem.
Will we have see Barbara and Alan prior to this meeting? I doubt it. No, one's in Africa and the other's somewhere. So we will not see them. But I would hope that they would get something from you that this was brought up and tabled,
Okay.
but that if they wish to discuss it, well, they don't want to discuss it, but it will be discussed at the meeting with the council, so they should know about it.
I would think for the purposes of making it clear to the council and for just for decorum purposes to prevent the meeting from, falling apart, when we get to that item, a member in the majority can indicate that it was the recommendation of the majority of the committee to put this provision in, and then have a member in the minority. I think maybe Omer and his particular, experience could be illustrative of the concerns of that minority, and that way the council understands the reason why, and they understand the concerns concretely, why there may be objection to it, and then they can make a recommendation, rather than getting into a one-on-one
we
debate
don't wanna
with
get
multiple
into
members. And in fact, you may wish to decide now who will speak on each point for an item like this, which is complicated, and then once each side has sort of made its position, it may be a little bit easier to have a free-flowing conversation with the council, but I'd be concerned that,
Barbara the main,
Yeah.
Barbara was the main person on this,
And I'll
speaking.
Yeah,
And,
I'll gladly volunteer. I said
and-
I'll gladly volunteer.
Well, I figured you were volunteering. Yes,
I would just make the point, I'm a little concerned that because you have a kind of a personal interest in this issue, that you may not be the best person to make that pitch, although I think it's important that they hear that from you. But, my view is more generic in terms of whether or not we should allow the free flow of ideas between the council members and their constituents, be they developers or private citizens. And I think that explanation needs to be put forth as well.
Yeah, and we can you can go down the line, so I'm happy to have John discuss that. But I don't have any more vested interest, so that's the other key here, because that vote happened years ago. It's done. I don't have any benefit from this. I gain absolutely nothing from this because I have nothing in front of city.
But just in general, I agree with your point. We can't all be,
yeah,
Starting
and
off
I would
with
honestly be
ideas we-
concerned that you're almost revoting by having every single member make their points. I think for
no, we
For
don't.
the sake, you should say that there was a majority opinion, and then, whether it's John or Omer can decide to, hopefully to illustrate both points of the arguments. I don't believe there were any other objections.
and I bring that up because, because of the sunshine law, we can't talk about these things or prep, for the meeting. So I bring this up publicly. I'm comfortable with Homer speaking to that issue, just want to identify some of the other aspects of the argument.
Yeah.
I'm certain it will have a lot of discussion.
Okay.
Don't think, the debt limit, I think the debt limits are fairly straightforward. The issue is, do we wish to raise them, lower them? Certainly I think if the council desires you to look into it further and try and narrow that down, that's the direction that they could give. As far as the contribution limits, that one, I don't know if there is even a majority-minority discussion point on it. This was for the campaign contributions. I don't know if Member Corey wants to take the lead on
I
that.
think you, Corey, weren't you?
I had a question about what you were just talking about before that. I'm sorry. The origins of the debt limits?
1 minute, hold on. You want to talk about?
Oh, what he just talked about.
What he just talked about.
Yes, origins,
All right.
yes.
Go right ahead.
The origins and debt limits, city attorney addressed local municipalities' limits, continued discussion with city council. I don't remember that from the last meeting. Was that at the last meeting? And what was the?
No, that was a very early one.
Okay, so what, can you give me the 5,000 degrees on what that
I'm trying to
is?
remind myself what that was, but I believe
Because I was like, did I?
it was,
Because when you talk about adjusting debt limits, it
Well,
spurs the
it's
question
the-
why, and
the charter, this is the language exact. The charter hereby provides for a legal debt limit in which caps the amount of outstanding long-term liabilities to 10% of assessed property value within the city. Now, as you recall, we actually wouldn't calculate what that is, and it's some outrageous amount of money, $140 billion. So you had asked, where'd this come from? And my real answer to that is it's just picked right out of the air, because a lot of communities have a number, and 10% probably sound extremely reasonable at the time. And it may sound reasonable for a very small jurisdiction, but a very large jurisdiction, even if the valuations are fairly low across the whole, it's gonna be an astronomical number. And so the question is, I think, do you want to have it, and do you want to consider something lower? But, what more would be an arbitrary number pulling out of the sky too? So I think you were looking for a little direction from the city council if that's something should even be looked at.
did you guys have any comparative analysis on comparable cities and what they're using for that number, or
No,
no?
because that would require a lot of factors, including finding a city about the same size with the same valuations.
How about neighboring county cities? Do
Well, I think that Fort Myers Beach has 10% too, but remember, even if valuations generally are higher on Fort Myers Beach because of being a waterfront community, there's not as many of them.
Right.
So it becomes very difficult to box yourself into a similar community, because you would need the potential valuation swing of the entire community, the number of, square miles. And then, well, depends on what the purposes of that city are. If you're a full-service city like Cape Coral with police and other things like that, and you're spending a lot more money versus a limited government city like Bonita or Estero, well then, different cap limits mean different things. So this was established at the beginning of the city, and I don't think the city knew what it was
Right.
planning at that time.
Court.
Yes.
I don't even know if you want to consider this anymore. I mean, you could take it out, you could leave it.
I'm definitely not raising it.
No, it's not in there to be raised. It was in there to be lowered.
I sort of lost track, Madam Chairman, of what
I
was.
know, what are you talking
I
about?
don't know. What were you gonna ask me? I forgot.
Oh, and
This was the contribution limit question. If we're going to change the formulas and the contribution limits.
No, I don't think I talked about that too much.
Or was that, Mr. Perdon? Was that
that
one of
was-
your items? I think so.
That was an item.
If you recall, we were asked to look at what the contribution limits are in other communities. We based those based on the state recommendations that all moved up to basically $1,000 per person versus a formulaic system like they have here in Bonita.
Well, the only thing I remember that was talking about was whether or not you could even limit contributions based on what is now federal law. But I don't know that I had any real concerns about.
We're talking about the debt limit of the city.
No,
No.
this was
We
the
moved on in-
follow-up item, yeah.
My mistake.
Yeah,
They both had the word limits.
yeah, no, I don't have a problem with what we're
Well,
doing
then maybe
with
we should
limits.
pull them
It
both
was
out.
whether or not we could even have a limit. That was my only concern.
Maybe in that case, we should pull both of these questions. Maybe they're no longer discussion items. And then focus in on the changes that you're making recommendations on.
yes.
Well, I'm fine with the debt limit going off the table. I thought the issue on section 15 was whether or not that is unduly restricting, tying the hands of the candidates because they simply didn't have enough funding there to
Do anything.
support a reasonable campaign in today's day and age. But none of us really knew that because, I guess with one exception,
know how much-
none of us have run for office or know whether or not these limits are reasonable. So we said, well, let's just put it to the council at that point.
right.
So I think I would suggest we go ahead and
That on
ask
there?
the question, and then if they say, gosh, yes, I'm glad you brought this up, we ought to look at that, then we can kind of come back and do some more homework on it.
Well, and if you recall, I provided a chart of the limits at other municipalities. That chart reflected two different things. It used to be that the limits were $500 for campaign contributions. The legislature had changed that to $1,000. Now, what ended up happening is many cities still had the $500 limit in their charters, and cities that didn't automatically moved up to $1,000. And so that chart had some comparable value, but it didn't reflect the issues of continuing cost escalations. And so I can provide that chart at the joint meeting so that they can have that conversation.
That would be good. That would be good.
If I recall correctly, part of that conversation too, on the comparable counties was, are we an oddball with this?
This is, we could find nobody has any.
So nobody does it the way we do it. So we are an outlier in how we're doing it. Okay. That's kind of,
I
John?
mean, that was part of the issue. This is a max cap based on a dollar amount per registered voter, where these other caps are based on an individual contribution. Like I can only contribute 100 or 500, whatever that may be. So it's, we're really talking apples and oranges here, and we ought to get a handle on whether this is an appropriate method to use on going forward.
I would say if we're the oddball community in the state of Florida, we're probably not doing something right.
I still think limiting in some capacity, like, you don't want it to start getting to be an arms race around here, where every candidate is raising, $200,000 for a city council seat, because that actually does drive, all of a sudden, the candidates being, needing to go out and try to appease people with money. And we certainly don't want to shift it in that direction. So right now, with the amount that they are allowed to raise, they could honestly raise that whether they know anyone with any money or not. It's just not a very severe amount. So everyone has a fair shot at running for council.
Except that you can't buy anything with that money today.
Right. That's kind
But
It
you
hasn't
ran your
gone with the
campaign.
times.
Well, I mean, you
She
ran
has
your
a point a
campaign.
little
I've
bit.
seen the different campaigns. It didn't seem like, I haven't seen too many
Well, I
that like
ran a
went way
campaign
above their,
For mayor with no problem with those limits.
yeah. Like, I just
But
haven't seen anyone kind
that
of
was 20
need to go
years
way
ago.
over that.
So,
Everybody's in the same handicap, though. So, I mean, essentially, even if everybody is at a disadvantage, they are all at the same disadvantage. But I
Which makes it an
mean,
even
my only issue is that holistically, if we're doing it completely weird from everybody, that doesn't seem right to me. But as it is currently, I see nobody has an
We will
advantage.
discuss it with your chart with the council.
One thing I may recommend, if your concern is to keep it fairly low, and concerned that I don't like the idea of putting a fixed number in a charter, which is difficult to change, particularly if, conditions change over time, inflation, et cetera, and the statutes change to move those numbers up. So it used to be until recently that county commissioner races or something like that would be $500. That's moved to $1,000. If you wanted to keep those limits somewhat low, you could say that they could match statutory limits at a reduced percentage. So that way you could keep it at 500, but if over time the statutory limit went to 2,000, you'd still have a lower limit, and so it wouldn't necessarily.
I don't think having a lower limit is, all important. I think having everybody being able to get the funds is good, so you don't want to place it where you have super PACs that have to come in and do this, but if we make it reasonable, and I think they will give us reasonable, the council, if they think it's enough, or if they think it's ridiculous, or what, I think they will give us a lead, and then we can come back and do something if we should.
Yeah. I mean, it's weird that it's not like in an index or something strange. Like, I mean, it's just to do an arbitrary calculation based
It was a
on
group of
population.
people that weren't politicians, that just did it for the good of having a city. And they wanted everything very low-key, low money. They didn't want, it was nonpartisan voting, which we had for a long time. And so they did these things because seriously, they were civic-minded people, and they were not politicians.
Good.
All right,
I think that takes care of all those items.
okay. Where are we? And I guess we have reviewed the agenda. So that's all right. Now the meeting dates and times. We've gotten all kinds of notices, and some are right and some are wrong, and we don't know where the wrong ones came from. So we're going to go over what they are.
So our joint meeting is September 9th here in these chambers at 2:30 PM. What we do need to determine is, and we can discuss that if you'd like with the council as well, but we need to determine our first public workshop of when you'd like to determine that. But we've set, then the following charter review committee meeting we will have will be September 23rd at 3:30, and we had determined previously that we would follow that with our second public workshop.
With our second public workshop. Right.
They have to be 10 days apart.
And they have, yes, they have to be 10 days apart, and did we determine?
Well,
They have to be
They have to
10
be
days
no-
apart, your
no
workshop.
more than 10
No
days.
more than 10 days apart.
So why don't we have a public workshop after the joint meeting with council?
We have a budget meeting.
Yeah.
Oh.
there's a budget.
Oh, that's right, yeah, that's right.
I thought that was September 4th. No. It's September 4th.
City council.
No, that was canceled, that, our part.
Our part of that was canceled.
Do we know the schedule of the other members? Like, do you know when Barbara's getting back from Africa, or where Alan's getting
He
back?
is actually,
Alan.
Oh,
I
Alan's
was
in
gonna
Africa.
say, Barbara's just actually out for 48 hours.
Oh, okay, and Alan, do you know when he's back?
I think I have it upstairs, but I think he's back for the next meeting.
Okay.
All right, so they're here then.
I think Russ is the only one who will not be at the joint meeting.
Do you have a suggestion for the workshop?
Monday the 16th, or,
Because it has to be quite soon. If you have to have it within 10 days of the next one.
when do you return, Russ?
You mean for Monday?
When do you return from your trip?
I will be coming in on the 9th.
Okay. Oh, yeah, you told me that. You fly in that
I could
night.
slip in. I'm not sure what the flight is.
Okay.
I know it's in the afternoon. So I'm thinking, I don't know. If I slip in, I still can slip in, right? I mean,
So the 16th?
You could do Monday, the 16th.
16th?
That doesn't give you 10 days in, does it?
It has to be no more than 10 days in
Oh,
between.
no more, oh, I'm
So
sorry.
it would be Monday and then Monday. We would have one.
Monday,
each Monday.
September 16th, you're saying?
Yeah,
That's all
Wait,
right.
so we're not meeting on September 4th?
Nope.
No, that's gone.
That's gone,
Take
okay.
that off.
All right.
No, I mean the same day, like do the 3:30 meeting followed by the workshop again.
What time do you want it?
Is that how we should do it?
Why? What do they need to talk about?
The workshop.
No,
Typically, you've done them in the evening, so 5:30 would,
whatever time works for everybody. 9 PM after dinner?
I think I have a wine dinner, so watch out what you're doing here. I do,
5:30?
at 6:30. That's all right.
4:30?
Or 4:30 that day?
4:30?
4:30, all right?
4:30 works.
16th?
On the 16th.
16th. Or even 5.
4:30.
You can see all the people we've had.
No. It's not like, right? We're not gonna upset people.
Yeah, the later the better in the day for me, because I'm coming back from a Florida restaurant lodging show in Orlando that day, but I'll get here in time.
And what's the agenda for these workshops? Is it to go over what's
What
been
we
agreed to
agreed to, correct?
with the
What we
council?
agreed to, and
what the public workshop is an opportunity for the public to hear what your draft is and provide you with public comment on that.
Okay.
So we'll have copies of the draft for the public as well. We'll put it online. And then you'll be able to, public will be able to ask questions and
Okay,
So what time?
the
30.
16th of public.
4:30 or 5?
It's up, whichever you all prefer.
You want to do
You
5?
said
I thought you said 4:30.
Chairwoman, you said that you had a dinner at 6:30, so wouldn't 4:30?
That's all right, I can be late. If we have the big crowds that we've had before, I would think we'll be all right.
5 o'clock?
5 o'clock.
5 o'clock. For the
Can you get?
Yeah.
Okay. 5 o'clock.
I'll be late.
All right.
You're going to send these all as invites?
Yes.
somebody? Okay.
If the invite doesn't come from me, then it is not an official invite,
Okay.
is the best way, because some people are getting other invites.
I think we should do it two ways. Is one, we'll send an email that
Yes.
lists all of these out
Yep.
as an email, and then we'll send calendar invite.
But
Good.
follow the ones that come from me,
Okay.
is your best bet if you're getting any other ones.
Right.
We've had some sort of error some
the
have gone out
Russians.
that's not an email address of the city that had meeting notices in it.
Oh, really? You know, Collier got caught up in a bunch of phishing scams that are really bad technologically, and it was done similar
Well,
mode,
they-
actually.
A whole bunch of little cities down in Texas
So even-
got ransomware.
It's a real thing.
No.
Nobody's going to ransom us, so we'll have to stay safe some other way.
I was just wondering if we've been hacked.
Right?
No.
No, we have financial precautions in place based on recent.
Alright.
You really?
Is there anything else we
We're
need?
gonna start getting city emails and be like, I don't know if I should open this.
In that case, I don't even feel bad about my ransomware.
With no
Camera's
further
still on.
comment, we adjourn.
Okay, good, thank you. You need a ride?
Yes.
I don't feel